All right, believe I'm live and such. I'll wait to make sure. Just to be sure. Usual test. Come on. There we go. Wait to make sure. All right, it works. Well enough. All right. So eventually I'll get to this, gravitational lensing, fake science. As if it isn't all really kind of fake in the sense that it's really, poor evidence, just not very well constructed science, not very scientific science. So, probably the way to say it, or a way to say it, the way I will say it at this particular moment. So, anyway, yeah, but I might as well do comments first. Not that there have been any that are terribly relevant. So Tyler says, ether versus the atmosphere, laugh loud. Don't even know what that means, so I think I'll just delete it. Jesus, already enough with the endless cigarettes and super triple quantum out proving every single person on the internet. I don't know what that means either, but I mean, clearly, you know, that's what the internet is for, is to prove. It's a proving ground, you could almost say, in a sense. And the hope is that the audience can tell when you've knocked somebody on the canvas and they're not getting up, that you won. Yeah, that's victory. They kind of know how to judge who won the argument. And often juries do a really bad job of figuring out who's guilty and who's not, and they do all kinds of irrational things. So I will malign the jury to some extent. I mean, I think that's a huge problem. Science couldn't get away with being as bad as it is if the jury was at all rational. They would know that these three bear stories really aren't good enough as evidence. You don't sit there and bring in the Papa Bear. You can obviously see the zipper on the suit. It's not really a Papa Bear. Come on, this is bullshit. So who's to fault? The lawyers for putting the crappy witnesses on the stand, or the crappy jury that sees the zipper and just says, well, I'm going to suspend disbelief and I'm going to play along. And yes, just because they say so, they must be right. And that just makes my life so much easier if I just concede I'm too stupid and they're really smart, so they know that bears have zippers and I'm silly to think that bears might not have zippers. Something like that. So yeah, that I'm stuck having to malign the jury, because the jury should be able to say, hey, you know what? You're right. This has never been really tested theory. They just make these proclamations. They don't really show us any of the evidence for any of this crap. And when they do show us the evidence, they describe it in these preposterously inaccurate ways. So it's just really bad science. All right. Who might happen to say or claim something in relation to physics? I don't even know what this guy was saying. Would much rather see these two battle it out in MMA cage. Yeah, well, that'd be fine too. I'm just saying, the idea is that there has to be a fight, and you seem to be complaining for no good reason. Like somehow I or Ken Wheeler or somebody else, I mean, I'm certainly playing my part. Ken Wheeler obviously is saying there's a no-show. He's fighting by proxy, and, he's a wimp and a sissy. So what else can you say? So fuck you. Anyway, so this is again Tyler. I also want to participate in burying animals with you. I really don't, Tyler. Just get yourself in order. Just get yourself into a nice stable routine, and then take on the world. But you can't take on the world on a unicycle, juggling 43 watermelons. It's just not going to happen. You got to slow down and just try to take things one at a time, get them fixed, and then work on the extra bits. But, whatever. Don't take my advice. It's okay. Fuck it. I will live stream your live stream and try to participate that way. Hangouts won't work on my $60 phone. Well, again, I mean, you have money problems, you don't have money problems, you this, I don't know. You're all over the place. I don't get it. Yeah, it's just too much chaos. I can't fix chaos. You're chaos. I mean, I'm already fighting enough battles. So that ain't gonna work for me. All right. Make one LED thing for me. Put on eBay. I will order. Yeah, well, that's it's I have to come up with some easy way to make it so you can just put it in a small box, of course. So the wire and you have to stick it on the wire, and so it's just like making it so it just pops out of the box and you just plug it in. I probably can't make it that way, so I can just send you the parts and hope you can figure it out for yourself. If you want me to do that, I can do that, but I don't have a manufacturing scheme, so there's no, I don't have the shortcuts necessary to make it practical to just make you one, and such. But thanks for the offer. I'll think about it, or something like that. All right, so on to, I don't think there's any comments, right? Hello, no video today? Yeah, there's lots of days of no video because you people are all too stupid. It's no point in me making videos. So I make less videos, and I'll probably make even fewer. I mean, I got to work on just making, subject propaganda videos, just to do the spiel and try to get people to understand that this is the logical process is to take the evidence on one side and take the evidence on the other side and do a fair comparison and realize that, yeah, okay, they've just done a lot of assuming. And if they stopped assuming these wrong things, there's a whole big world that opens up where you can start unifying things and connecting things once you let go of this quantum mechanics nonsense and this stupid relativity shit. They're two really rigidly small ideas that narrow the way you can look at the universe. And they do it in a way that closes the door to the obvious unification that should be done, because obviously the forces have so much in common. The inverse square law, for example, the speed of light, for example, the speed of force. I mean, there's no stream. I think that's what it's called. What do you mean there's no stream? No picture. Huh. Well, oh, my bad. Yeah, okay, you caught me. I thought I did put the screen share on, so I forgot. So thank you. Thought you were being a bit irrelevant, but after all, you are correct. So that should be better now. Yeah, just sometimes the computer freezes when I do something, so I don't want to do anything anymore. Yeah, a silly fear on my part. There. Well, that's good though. The icon might be a good idea because I seem to be a distraction. People look at my hair. Look, I'm wearing a funny green wife beater. So there's always something to mock or distract people. So it's best sometimes for there to be no me to distract anybody. All right. So what we have here is this thought company dot. I guess it's com. Yes. An introduction to gravitational lensing. And I just thought I'd go through this because it's just this demonstrates what's wrong with physics. This is too common. I guess I should make the text bigger so blind people like myself can read it. No, I mean, not entirely. So this was actually updated October 20th, 2017. So I don't know why they didn't point out how there was the most perfect eclipse possible in the most technologically advanced, right over the most technologically advanced area on planet Earth. mean, went right over some of the most technically advanced places on Earth. And yet nobody could repeat the famous Eddington experiment. Nobody could take some really good photographs and compare them. No one. Surprise, surprise, or what? I mean, and it being just a year off the 100th anniversary of Einstein's theory, right? So just a couple of years removed from from when Einstein was declared right. It was probably exactly the same time as Einstein was declared in the New York. I think the New York Times headline was something like, 1918 or 17. I mean, yeah, it's kind of a stunning when you think about it that nothing repeated. Nobody, for the sake of tradition and celebration of their great science and the great theory of relativity, decided to do this, honor that great theory by demonstrating some of this rock solid evidence, by repeating the evidence. Nope, nobody could do it. But that's not evidence. That doesn't mean anything to you people. Seems irrelevant to you, even though nothing in my brain can make that make sense, right? I mean, there's no way it makes sense that no scientist, no collection of scientists, no group of scientists, no institution, no anything thought this was important enough to do the experiment under perfect conditions. Just saying. I mean, I could end my argument right there, right? I could walk into court, and to me, that piece of evidence all by itself is almost, oh, okay, that makes it pretty clear. This shit isn't about evidence. This is just about faith and belief, and it really isn't about constructing a proof. They just don't care about proving themselves right. They're just going to declare themselves right, and all you people just believe it. Oh, he's wearing very thick glasses and he knows mathematics, therefore he knows the truth. He didn't just make it up or accept a pile of crap made up by somebody else, when that's exactly what happened. All right, all right. In the history of astronomy, scientists used many tools to observe and study the objects in the universe. Most are telescopes, yay, and detectors, whatever that would be. However, one technique relies simply on the behavior of light near massive objects to magnify light. So again, keyword magnify, with a backward lens, which just can't be possible. I'll say it again, but the gravity lens doesn't work like one of these. It doesn't magnify. See, this lens takes stuff at a point and it spreads. That magnifies it. That enlarges the image. And then we move that enlarged image into our eye. So that's how magnification takes place. That can only happen if you bend the light on the outside more than you bend the light on the inside. So between any 2 points on this lens, any 2 points, out here, and here, it always has to bend because it's taking something that's spread to make it bigger. That's the magnifying part, make it bigger. So it makes it bigger in some portion of the lens. It has to bend the stuff out here more than the stuff in here to get to our focus on our eye. And the gravity lens bends more on the inside and less on the outside. It can't do it. It can't do what's required for there to be magnification. All right. Magnify light from very distant stars, galaxies, and quasars. So galaxies and quasars is a silly, right there we're already in trouble with their verbiage, because they came up with these words before they figured out what these things were. Because technically quasars are galaxies. They're just very young galaxies. So this is sort of an interesting thing in the evolution of these things function, is there's a sort of a recognition that old galaxies expand, new galaxies are very small. So quasars are the most dense, tiniest objects kind of in the universe. Very small footprint, just a couple of light weeks across, maybe. Tiny, where a full-grown galaxy can be 100,000 light years across. Huge difference. But anyway, so now they're using words like quasar, like it's somehow different than a galaxy when it's really not. It's a galaxy just in its early formation. So it's called gravitational lensing. And it's a completely wrong use of the word lens because it doesn't connect to the traditional notion of lens, which is focusing light, because you can't do it with a lens that's constructed backward. If all the lenses were concave lenses, when you thought of lensing, you would think of, oh, complete fuck up. It doesn't work. I can't magnify anything with it. And observations of such lensing are helping astronomers explore objects that existed in the very earliest epochs of the universe. So these are all just statements about what they've done, tiny shreds of evidence. So let's just understand, I keep saying it, I just keep saying it over and over again. This evidence they have collected is tiny, okay? Minuscule little circumstantial circumstances that exist, and they create whole theories and whole paradigms, whole models of connect the dots, and they have very few dots. So it's like they have 10 dots, and technically, you can't tell the difference between Donald Duck and Richard Nixon without a minimum of 40 dots, let's say. You need at least 40 to be able to tell the difference, and they have 10. And they're making these declarations about what they're doing. We're seeing this, and we're doing that, and we're doing, as if that's what they're really doing. Like as if they were actually there and they were witnessing the cars on the track or something, like they were witnessing a real event, when all they're doing is seeing a tiny clipping from an old newspaper and combining that with, an old beer bottle, and they're saying, oh, these two pieces of evidence demonstrate it. We've proven it. And they haven't proven anything. They also reveal the existence of planets around distant stars. So again, just wow, big leap, and unveil the distribution of dark matter. And so unveil as if it's always there and we're just revealing something, when it's completely not a reveal. It's completely a construction, a contrived, made something up. We put it there to fix because it didn't work with it not there. So it's like they have this connected dot drawing, but there's no dots for tires or wheels, and they wanted to make it a car. It's actually a boat. But because they think car, they just drew the wheels in. And so now they're saying it's a car. Look at the wheels. But they didn't, the wheels weren't part of the dots. They added those dots to make the wheels. It's a boat, and they're going to keep calling it a car. All right, that's one paragraph down, so we'll see if there's any comments relevant to this subject. Okay, you said you didn't take advantage of, yes, they didn't take advantage of the eclipse, but maybe that's because there were no stars. Amazing. In the exact right spot to test. There's no way you could miss a whole field of stars. See, the sun actually does move through the eclipse. The sun, some, but it's exact. There's always every place in the. You couldn't point to one place in space and say there's no stars. There's no empty spots, so there's no way it could miss being in some portion of a very, of galaxies and, all that crap. There's tons of that shit everywhere. Exact right spot to test. I read Eddington got lucky. I read Eddington got lucky, ? I read Eddington got lucky. And again, how do you get lucky? He had really bad weather. So instead of 10,000 stars on his plates, he was supposed to get 10,000 stars. He got less than 1,000. So he had a 10th-time degrade in the quality of his photographs to start with. And that's looking through a hazier atmosphere, one full of water drops and shit because it had rained a lot. So the atmosphere was degraded substantially, 10 times worse than ideal conditions, 10 times worse. And he's going to try to measure a tiny amount of movement. And that bad atmosphere means you get more aberration, that is more haze around anything. So instead of having some kind of precise star going like this, he has a star this size going like this, and he's supposed to know where the center of that star is. You can, I mean, the luck has nothing to do with science. All right, you don't you don't do it by luck. You do it by having really good process and being lucky to have good weather. So Eddington was profoundly unlucky because the weather sucked and half his plates got ruined, another fact, before he even took the pictures. I mean, it really wasn't lucky. It's junk science is what it was. And it was really poor science for him to pretend that he had enough, that it was good enough. It wasn't good enough. And that's why it took them so long to announce the results, is because I think there was some rational scrutiny over the fact that they didn't have the evidence. I don't understand what that symbol means. Yeah, I don't understand what any of them mean. Oh, it's a rainbow. The psychology of many scientists is that of validating. I mean, this doesn't mean anything. No, I think it's the psychology of many humans, regardless, and scientists included, that they're dupes and suckers and they're gangers, gangbangers. And physics is just a gangbang. Just they're just blues or reds or greens. And it's like, you got to be part of our club. And our club believes this fairy tale about the three bears. And, we are glued to it. And we really don't do any of this talking about diversity or accepting the fact there might be a challenge. We don't accept challenges. We just machete them to death. Like self-fulfilling prophecies, they extrapolate to make results fit expectations. I know, well, clearly a scientist is supposed to be way above that. A scientist is supposed to know cheating is bad. Okay. And we're not going to do that cheating thing. And when we're going to say we prove something, we're going to actually have proven it. We're not going to sit there and pretend like we're just going to shyster the jury and just say, look, it's the most proven theory ever. And you wouldn't have a microwave oven without us. And if we didn't know all this great stuff, you wouldn't know what you know. And we're totally important. And, they're just hyping the evidence. They're not showing the evidence. Quack science, like the used by the ministers to prove God. Well, yeah, it's that bad, pretty much. If gravity is not pull, but push, yes. I mean, it's running out on the subject, but whatever. We're talking about photons being bent by gravity when there's no evidence that photons are bent by any other force. And so why would photons, this electromagnetic thing, you can't bend it with electro or magnetic, yet gravity bends it? And without the inverse square law, photons are exempt to the inverse square law. So somehow a light bulb produces, if I'm an electron and I'm here, there's only so many photons that can hit me from the light bulb. But if I'm a photon, I get hit by twice as many by magic rules. Okay. You push. How do you explain the bulge of the tides? The tides are really complex subjects on the sides of the Earth closer to the moon. It's not because it's closer to the moon. The tides I've already explained. Have been explained by physicists. There's physicists who understand this stuff. The tides are really pulling the water from the poles. So it's the combined gravity of the part of the Earth that's going lateral to the gravity is actually the part that gets more gravity. You can sort of, because it's thicker. So it's like the atmosphere absorbing more light, making the sun look orange or big. It's the same kind of effect, that in a sense, and that the gravity pulls on that water more, actually. And it's the pulling, that is the push from the other side of the water, because it's feeling more gravity uh, pull from the moon. So it's not so much the world Earth is bulging, it's that the Earth is being pulled on its sides, being, you know, it's not getting fat, it's getting shortened. Way to say it. It only looks fatter because it's getting shorter. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't pay attention to the title. Ooh, good enough. All right, anyway, so moving on. Mechanics of gravitational lens of the, so this is where they really just, it's laughable. The concept behind gravitational lensing is simple. Everything in the universe has mass. Okay, now some physicists don't agree with that anyway. I mean, photons are in the universe. They don't think they have mass. Electrons, they don't even think has a standing mass. And that mass has a gravitational pull. Okay, so far not great, but good enough. If an object is massive enough, it is its strong gravitational pull will bend light as it passes by. So they really shouldn't say if it's massive enough, because it's not just about mass, it's about the density of the mass. So again, the sun is hugely massive, but it's not very dense. And it's the gravity on the surface of the sun is only 8 times. So even though the sun is 1,000,000 times bigger than the Earth, okay, in volume, 1,000,000 times bigger, the surface gravity is only 8 times bigger or greater, because the sun is made out of gas, very light, very few heavy atoms, high atomic weight, very spread out, very thin, and we're very dense. We have lots of electrons and protons a lot closer together. So the sun has electrons and protons far apart. We have electrons and protons very close together. Big difference in the strength of the gravity. So again, their lensing experiments require there to be a density of gravity to bend light. You can't bend light without density. Okay, a gravitational field of a very massive object. So again, they should be saying very dense, such as a planet, star. So they're even putting planet in here, which is, really should be against the law. Star or galaxy cluster. So again, galaxy clusters very undense. Okay, lots of empty space combined with the obvious material bits. So you have to think about it in terms of the density, because as you weaken the density, as you dilute it, the gravity gets weaker and weaker and weaker. You want to have concentrated, to have high gravity, you have to have concentrated atomic weight, mass. Concentrated mass creates high gravity. Dispersed mass creates very weak gravity. All right, or a galaxy cluster, or even a black hole, pulls more strongly at objects in nearby space. So again, not very technically correct at all. For example, when light rays from a more distant objects pass by, they are caught up in the gravitational field, bent, and refocused. So again, by a lens that's backward from a focusing lens. That is a lens that's not taking light, that's diverging from one core. This is how you magnify. You have to diverge the light, make a bigger image, and then focus the bigger image. That's not what a gravity lens is going to do, because it's going to bend the light on the outside much less. That means it only gets a little bit of bending. And the light in here, it's going to bend too much. No focus. No can see. All right, the refocused image is usually a distorted view of the more distant object. It wouldn't be just distorted by a gravity lens. It would be unrecognizable as anything. And even a regular lens, just a tiny bit out of focus, will just create blobs of color. This lens, if I hold it up and try to put me somewhere behind it, well, anyway, all you get is blobs. You get blobs of stuff. Blobs, blobs, blobs. You don't get clear images unless you have the right focus. Let's see. In some extreme cases, entire background galaxies, for example, may end up distorted into long, shiny, banana-like shapes. So this is just made up because that's what they look like. That's not a true fact, okay, because you can't do that with the lens they're using. Because again, anything that has any thickness, so just think of it like at any point, what do I do with the regular lens? There it is. Again, so anything that has any thickness in the lens, so say there's an inch here, it's an inch of the lens over here. No matter, no matter where it is located, it has to be this way. And this part of the lens is bending the light more than this part of the inside part. Gravity does exactly the opposite. It bends the light that needs to be bent less, more, and it bends the light that needs to be bent more, less. It can't give you these patterns. It can't do it. All right, see if there's any comment after paragraph 2. Whoa. Let's see. Never mind. I'm getting a little confused here. Okay, fine. Okay, it's okay, but I think it does make sense to say that the bulge comes from water being pushed from the other side. No, it's not the other side, so that's not true. Again, and it's not being pulled. These are just things that we, obviously, yes, it's being accelerated. As I've pointed out before, gravity works on the concept of acceleration. Something has to actually absorb energy. So it's like if this was the energy, this little beer bottle, it's moving this way, and it hits my hand, then my hand moves. That's an absorption of this thing's energy. So this moves the speed of light. This hand moves a lot slower, but it moves in this direction. The beer bottle doesn't get where it was going, and therefore the compensating force is now stronger, and it accelerates. For example, in the case of the tide, it accelerates the seawater, all right, towards the moon, and by doing so, thickens the depth of the water at the lower latitudes, the more equatorial latitudes. That's why the tides are so much higher and lower on the north and south, as you go up and down on the Earth, closer to the poles, the tides get more extreme. My father grew up on the Bay of Fundy, and it's one of the highest tide variations, very high. It was, I'd go there and it was really kind of neat to see because, one part of the day the ships all are sitting in the water, and the next day big ships, 100, 200 foot long ships, they're sitting in 10 feet of mud, All right, it's okay, but I think it does make sense to say that the bulge comes from the water being okay, right, did that. Like when you squeeze one side of a balloon, the other side gets bigger. Yeah, well, it's not the sides, so, it's not the front and back argument. It has nothing to do with it. All right, the thickness of the Earth is only 4,000 miles. So the gravity from the moon on one side of the Earth and the other side of the Earth is so infinitesimally irrelevant. 4,000 miles over 250,000 miles, right? I think the moon's 250,000. It's, just too small a difference, okay, for there to be any difference in how the two sides of the Earth are being affected. like when you squeeze one side. Okay, well, I think I really get it. Okay. I was thinking on the push mechanism being between Mun Earth to cause this. I don't know what that means. Oops. I don't know what oops is either. Oh, by the way, Gary, I think that you're right. The gravity bends less on the edges. Well, I know I'm right about the fact that gravity gets weaker the further away from the gravitational source you go, and it gets stronger the closer you go. And that if the amount of gravity is what's bending the light, yes. Now, getting rid of the inverse square law does give them some capacity to play with the gravity and equal it out more. But again, that's such a gimmick, that who can take that seriously? But if it's a bigger object, then maybe. I'm just saying, how is there any maybe about it? Gravity has, by the inverse square law, it gets stronger. And even if you just do the R law, okay, it's still proportionally stronger closer to the center and weaker further away. And you need it to be exactly the opposite to create a magnifying lens. You don't need stuff from the center to make a ring. I don't know what that means, but yes, you do. Then I'm just going to be contrary. Yes, you do. All right, the prediction of lensing. So this is the famous bullshit. The idea of gravitational lensing was first suggested in Einstein's theory of general relativity. It really wasn't the first time it was suggested, so that's wrong. Around 1912, Einstein himself derived the math for how light is deflected, funny word to use, as it passes through the sun's gravitational field. Now, he speculated as to that. And again, the key gimmick is that his argument is essentially that light is moving the speed of light, therefore is time dilated, which is supposed to be a perceptual problem for the person in the frame, not a physical reality. And because of that perception of time dilation, which frankly should be the other way around, right? I don't think they even have this time dilation argument correct, because you think, if it takes 1 second to go across the sun's gravitational field for a photon, so let's say it takes 1 second to do that, we can measure how long it takes the photon to do it. Now, the photon thinks it, because it's time dilated, it perceives that 1 second to happen faster in a half second. It doesn't think it took 2 seconds. This part doesn't make sense. So I don't even know how time dilation would save the photon. I mean, make the photon think it got twice as much light. It would think it got half as much light. It would feel like only a half second went by. That's what the photon would think. Hey, it's only been a half second. The outside world did a whole second. He thinks it's only a half second. So how does that even make sense? All right, anyway, it's just a gimmick. So anyway, his idea was subsequently tested. So this is the big joke. So this they call a test of this idea that light is bent by gravity. During a total eclipse of the sun in May 1919 by astronomers Arthur Eddington and Frank Dyson, and a team of observers stationed in cities across South America and Brazil. I don't know what this, they had 2 teams, frankly, of observers. They weren't all in different places. It was 2 telescopes, just 2. And the 2 groups didn't exactly have consistent results. And it took them some time to argue about those results. Their observations proved that gravitational lensing existed. So that's just a declaration, right? Their observations proved it. They should say their data collected proved it. That might be better. But we know that that's not a true statement. the burden of proof was a lot higher than what was met by that evidence. The evidence was weak, incredibly weak. This guy's looking for, the degree difference. When they, we're talking about 1.75 arc seconds. Now, without Einstein's cheat, it would just be 78 or something arc seconds, 96 arc seconds, or some small number. So Einstein's cheat doubles the number. So now you have at least 1.75 arc seconds or something. This little tiny degree difference. Now, in real degrees, though, in real 360 degree things, that's 0.0005 or something degrees. It's a tiny amount of change in its position. That he was so even under ideal circumstances, this is an experiment that is dicey in terms of your capacity to measure the actual center of these little objects in this sea of blur. All right, and the team observes. Okay, all right, proved lensing. Okay, their observations prove that gravitational lensing existed. So just in a statement that just, the case hasn't been proven. Proven to what kind of standard of evidence? If that's the standard of evidence, if that was actually a proof in 1919, this one experiment done on rigged math and on, almost impossible, way beyond the measurement capacity of the time. While gravitational lensing has existed throughout history, well, yeah, sure. Well, if it really existed, then yes, it would exist throughout history. But again, there's no evidence in history. History doesn't provide any evidence of it. All right, so I'll read comments now. You need stuff from the center to make a ring, or whatever, because the square law, inverse square law, it would only bend light that's close to it for us to be able to see. So again, you're just not getting it. It's exactly the wrong shape lens. It bends the light on the outside. The stuff that needs to be bent more, it's bending less. The stuff that needs to be bent less, it's bending more. Anyway, that's not possible. I don't know what that means. Can I buy a hippie complex? I can block you. I can do that for you, so you don't have to buy it. I'll do it for free. I mean, what the fuck is wrong with these idiots? Wow, way to be colossally irrelevant. Don't make an argument, pussy. You flapping pussy. No one can buy the whatever that is package from Star Citizen for $27,000. I don't know. What does that have to do with something? No one can buy it? No one has $27,000? I don't know what that even means. I'm just going to remove it. It's stupid. They declared later on that the experiment had too many uncertainties to be considered proof. Who declared? They declared later. Who declared later? Where did that happen? They're still talking about it. They're still writing an article. This was updated in 2017. Clearly, this article has no idea that they declared later. Clearly, in Eddington's own diary, he says he wouldn't stake his life on the results. He pointed out all of the problems, the technical problems he had with the experiment, and pointed out he wouldn't stake his life on the results. And yet, when it was time to do the promotion for it, he certainly didn't show any of the same apprehension he had when he was writing his personal diary. All right, well, gravitational lensing has existed throughout history. It's fairly safe to say that it was first discovered in the early 1900s. So again, they claim this is a discovery. It hasn't been a repeated experiment. That's supposed to be one of the keynotes to science, is that you repeat experiments. You don't just do once and say, okay, we did it, now we can move on. We don't have to make sure that wasn't a fluke or somebody made a mistake or something else. You usually have to repeat experiments. Well, this experiment hasn't been successfully repeated. It was attempted and failed because of technical issues a couple of times. And then when there were perfect weather conditions where there were no technical issues, nobody did the experiment. Today, it is used to study many phenomena and objects in the distant universe. So again, the assumption that it's there, the assumption they've proved it, we don't have to even discuss it. And again, they don't even talk about the implications of what they're saying, in the sense that this is a force, light, it moves the speed of force. And yet, unlike all the other forces that can't interact with themselves, like you can shoot laser beams into laser beams all day long, and you can't make the photons hit each other. Just like magnetism, all these other forces that have to actually get to a material object before they can have effect. Force can't affect force. Here we have the exception, and based on this tiny bit of evidence. Stars and planets can cause gravitational lensing effects. They just keep saying it. We already know it, although those are hard to detect. Yeah, that's right. They're hard to detect, and certainly stars doing it is hard to detect, and you don't have any evidence. Eddington experiment, it's all you've got. You've had a Hubble telescope. It's afraid to look anywhere near the sun. Lots of excuse making. Clearly, it kind of has to be done to be done to have any hope to getting past the problem of the aberration caused by the atmosphere. You have to do it from space, and there seems to be no effort to do it from space. The gravitational, except in radio waves or using some other modality for which you're not getting back maybe 2% of the radiation, which means it could all be accounted for as scatter. The gravitational fields of galaxies and galaxy clusters can produce more noticeable lensing effects. Yeah, they can if you can get close enough to the gravitational weight. But where's the evidence that you're getting anywhere near the gravity? The gravity, just like the gravity from the sun, where the Earth is only 0.0042 meters per second. It's a tiny fraction of the gravity we feel from the Earth. So 1/1,000,000th of the strength of the gravity we feel from the Earth is what the sun is pulling on us from the distance we are from the sun. It's a tiny, infinitesimally small amount of gravity, and they're claiming it bends light. Because that's what you have way outside in a galactic cluster. The gravity way out there is even less than the sun. It's like 0.0000000000000000 meters per second. Tiny, tiny, tiny amount of gravity. All right, stars and planets can cause gravitational lensing effects. All right, I already read that, but it's such crap. The gravitational fields of galaxies and galaxies can produce some noticeable lensing effects. And it now turns out, so again, another statement implying that, oh yes, we have this huge pile of evidence that just demonstrates OJ did have Bruno Mali's shoes and the black leather gloves. Yeah, that dark matter, which has a gravitational effect, can also cause lensing. So just an assumption about an assumption. I mean, it turns out that our fake made up dark matter stuff, the magical invisible matter that has no properties of matter except conveniently it makes gravity. That doesn't sound like just some convenient made up pile of shit, right? No, of course, it sounds exactly like what a complete made up piece of shit would look like. If you were going to make up a piece of fake evidence, that's exactly what fake evidence would look like. The invisible man. So if I go into court and I just say, look, there's this invisible man. He has all the properties of a regular criminal, except you can't see him. But he steals stuff. So he murders things. So obviously he murdered her, and my client is innocent, because obviously the invisible man did it. I mean, you'd laugh me out of court, but how come they're not even scrutinized for saying something that preposterous? We demonstrated with our fake stuff that this theory is correct. I mean, if that isn't circular evidence, the evidence of dark matter proves the existence of lensing, and the lensing proves the existence of dark matter. How convenient. Just an absolute pile of shit. So this is one of these new drawings. It's just almost too silly because you can't see what the fuck this is supposed to be. So it's all cutouts of everything. So this big blob is apparently this little blob here. And the lensing is, again, happening way out here where there's no gravity at all, just tiny, tiny amounts of gravity. And obviously it's going to bend the light more here and bend it less here. Yet they don't draw it that way. They don't draw this line going straighter and this line going bending more. No, they draw it just like a traditional lens would produce, not a gravity well. Gravity wells don't do this. So it's just more crap. So they call this gravitational lensing and how it works. Light from distant objects passes by a closer object with a strong gravitational pull. The light is bent and distorted, and that creates images of the more distant object. So this is from NASA. So again, traditional drawing of the bending and the focus. And that's a gravity lens does not bend the light this way. It bends the light on the inside more. It bends the light on the outside less, which is exactly the opposite of what you have to do for you to enlarge this image. This thing cannot be enlarged any other way. Oh, they have it this way. This is the distant object over here. And this is the light getting bent this way, but it's obviously the same. It doesn't really matter. So again, just wrong. But nobody will agree. Then none of you will actually just admit, just type and say, "You're right. That's wrong. They shouldn't draw it that way because that's not how gravity works." I mean, you could just say that. "You're right, Gary. Why don't they just admit gravity doesn't work that way?" All right. Let's see. Okay, so here we go. Oh my gosh, that's so interesting, Gary. Where do you find this information? I couldn't find any of it. I don't know. You bits and pieces here and there. I mean, where do they say Eddington doubted the results? Go look up, just type Eddington's diary or journal. I think it was called a journal. So type in Eddington's journal, and it's published on a web. Somebody showed me the PDF, and you could read it, So it's a public document. Where's an actual example of lensing? Are there any pictures? There's a ton of pictures, but the point is they're not lensing. So because the lens can't lens. I mean, you're just not getting the point. Having a picture of something that can't possibly happen through the mechanism they say it's happening through, you're not getting it. It can't possibly be the way. I mean, here you have a car, you have, let's say you have a highway, you have skid marks, and then you have a car in a tree. Now, yeah, the logic says, yeah, the car skidded and went into the tree. But say you have proof that the skid marks are the wrong size for the tires. So it couldn't have possibly been from that car. Well, now you got a question, right? Of, well, how did the car get into the tree? And it's still an open question that needs to be answered, and you have to have evidence before you draw conclusions. And I'm just saying clearly, I'm pointing out how you can't use this simple, oh, we'll just, pretend the evidence fits when it doesn't. It's like the two-slit experiment. It doesn't fit. You have to acquit. Sometimes that's a true statement. Sometimes when the evidence doesn't fit, you have to acquit. And they're fundamental, they're foundational evidence. This isn't just like peripheral evidence that isn't fitting. This isn't a minor glove, and you have volumes of blood evidence, and you have all the circumstantial evidence, and the fact that OJ just happened to horribly cut his finger on the very night his wife's head fell off. All kinds of evidence you have. So this one little glove thing don't matter too much. But this is foundational evidence. All right. I'm seriously. Okay. Fine. I think I'll be crinkly. I'm crinkly. This quote should get you to the article on Google, but there's no direct reference to the claim, although it was later shown that uncertainties were too large to make any definitive statement. Reference to the claim, although it was later shown. The quote should get you to the article on Google. Yeah, the article by who? Written by who? But there's no direct reference to claim. Well, right. So I was saying that doesn't mean much for anybody can say anything, but clearly it's true that the evidence was too weak for the confidence expressed. And it should be just acknowledged in hindsight by science that, yes, this is an experiment that you can't really use as proof because it's just not good enough evidence. Oh, thanks. Wait, are you suggesting OJ didn't do it? Of course I'm not suggesting that. It was quite obvious OJ did it. Quite the fucking obvious. Gary, I love your analogies. They're insightful and make me laugh. Oh, good. I'm not getting it. Okay. Then how the fuck are all these images distorted? Each one of them has to be taken for what they are. Okay. Now, first, they're time exposures. Let's understand that. They're highly processed by computers. And what I would argue is what you can see in most of the images is that it all has some spherical connection. That is, all the lensing has some connection to spherical symmetry. Now, it's not the exact symmetry that lensing would create, so that's a giveaway that it's not lensing, but any explosion would have that symmetry, right? Anything that gets exploded if you're standing next to an explosion, your body parts will spread symmetrically from the explosion. Some pieces will go a little faster, some pieces will go a little slower, so there'll be a fuzziness to it. But the fact is, I could put an arced piece of paper, and I could have you splatter onto that paper in a pretty symmetrical way. Now, your parts will be all distorted. Okay, your liver might end up where your face should be, and your face will end up where your ass should be. But, technically, you'll still be, in essence, a you. Now, the same could happen to a galaxy if there was something exploded, or the galaxy itself, the nucleus of the galaxy explodes. You can imagine that stuff would be moved and compressed as part of the process of the energy moving through all of that matter. So the suns in the middle would get pushed faster, and the suns further away would move slower, and they'd all end up being compressed into an arc. So I can give you an explanation for what could create smoke rings or could create these kinds of images, and they don't have to be lensing. Now, the other point is that because they're time exposures, some of this stuff could be stuff that's much closer that's actually moving, So, but the point is I'm demonstrating why their evidence is weak. To do that, to have you acknowledge that their evidence is weak, I don't need to give you a counter explanation. I just need to point out how their evidence has inconsistencies, are problems, in that it has dualities or things for you to have reasonable dissidence about, and that it's not evidence to declare proof. It's not nearly good enough to declare the subject closed, and they have closed the subject. All right. You really need to pay attention. I don't know what that means, asshole. Their entire galaxy is getting bent. Weak explanation. So again, instead of pointing out how their evidence is weak, incredibly weak. I mean, the lens is the wrong shape. The gravity is way weak where the lensing is taking place. So you have a galactic cluster of very undense matter. I mean, you couldn't get, it's a million times less dense than the sun. So the gravity in these locations is incredibly weak. And so I have the wrong shaped lens. The gravity is weak anyway. Okay. The images don't have any of the accurate symmetry they should have. They are lensing objects that are quite thick in the lens. And as I've pointed out, the thicker they are in the lens, the more dependent the shape of the lens is, the more important that the lens have exactly the right shape to create a focus. It has to bend each ray of light a proportionally different amount to render the image. And all of those factors against it, and this asshole says, weak explanation to me. So instead of conceding their evidence is weak, he just keeps selling the bullshit. Why? Why are you doing that? At least you admit you fail. Where did I admit I fail? So another preposterous statement. But where did I admit my fail? I made a perfectly valid, rational argument about why you shouldn't believe in these fake gods, this complete religious theory that now contrives the existence of dark matter to make these lensing images make sense, because they can't make them mathematically make sense without the dark matter. And you say, I've conceded failure? I mean, just keep lying. You said you didn't have to explain it. I said I don't need to point out how their evidence is weak. You don't get the argument? You're saying I haven't pointed out how the evidence is weak. You're saying the evidence is strong. I'm saying there's no other evidence but these images, which I've explained the images. I've pointed out how they don't have the symmetry. They're in this article. I'll show them. The smiley face image is horrible symmetry. It makes absolutely no sense. Gravity when there's huge masses, gravity has to be spherical. That's why the sun's round. That's why the earth's round. That's why all the planets are round. That's what gravity does. It creates spheres, idiot. That's what the inverse square law does. It creates spheres. All right. See, you're the liar. Okay. You're done. I mean, I'm trying to be reasonable and you're just being unreasonable. I mean, you're pathetic. But you're a perfect example of exactly the kind of jackass, of coward who comes onto these boards and just preaches this dogma. I gave you perfectly valid arguments. You haven't countered one of them. How is the lens not the wrong shaped lens? Why don't you explain to me how the wrong shaped lens can lens light? Why don't you do that, liar? Please, go ahead, explain to me. What do you mean? You're defending it, jackass. I never preached it. You're defending it. It's the same thing. Defending the preacher and preaching is the same thing. How's that any different? I mean, Hitler hired Mengele. you know what? Hitler's not accountable? Quote me. Okay, I'll quote you. First you said I failed. I admit failure. I didn't admit I failed. I said I don't even need to make the counter argument. I said I can make the counter argument. I can give you a counter theory, but it has nothing to do with the fact that their evidence isn't good enough to convict. They haven't proven their case, is the argument. I don't have to prove innocence. They have to prove guilt to have that kind of confidence. I'm saying they can't prove guilt, and in fact, I can prove innocence. How's that admission of failure, liar? All right, you're just, how are all those images distorted? So again, right there, aren't you defending something? How did I say the images? What does this even mean? Then how the fuck are these images distorted? Distorted in what way? There's pictures of galaxies stretched in funny shapes, but you can see the individual stars. And those images are from things that are in a galactic cluster. That means it's hundreds of thousands of light years across. That blotch. That blotch is hundreds of thousands of light years across. And the gravity across that whole area has to be perfect to create a focus for you to see something 100,000 light years across. There has to be, the distortion has to be perfect. The lens shape has to be just the fuck right. And it's going to be exactly the fuck wrong. Yeah, well, I don't know. There's no point in investing in you. I can say you're false, and so are they, full of shit, and so are they. So in what way am I full of shit? You want to quote me? I mean, what did I say that's full of shit? That's the wrong shape lens? That the gravity's too weak in the locations where the lensing is? What statement did I make that's full of shit as a statement? Come on, coward. All right, let's see, I got that one already done. Okay, so I'll go back to reading. You think about it, fuckhead. Yeah. All right. There are two main types of lensing: strong lensing and weak lensing. Bullshit. Strong lensing is fairly easy to understand. Yeah, no, I was afraid not, with the wrong shape lens. If it can be seen with the human eye in an image, say from the Hubble Space Telescope, then it's strong. Weak lensing, on the other hand, is not detectable with the naked eye. Well, the Hubble telescope isn't exactly the naked eye, but whatever. And due to the existence of dark matter, so again, just to claim that it exists, even though we have absolutely no evidence that this invisible matter exists, all distant galaxies are a tiny bit of weak lensing. So that doesn't make any sense. Weak lensing is used to detect the amount of dark matter in a given direction in space. So more just nonsense. It's an incredibly useful tool for astronomers. Yeah, it's really useful when you can just make it up, helping them understand the distribution of dark matter in the cosmos. So just an amazing pile of crap where there's absolutely no evidence. And all they're doing is looking for where their math fails and then claiming, oh, that's a success. Our math fails. We'll just put, oh, that's a discovery of dark matter. So every place where the math doesn't work out right, they just say, oh, dark matter, dark matter. So at any time they have a dot in the wrong place or a place where a dot is missing, dark matter. They just fill it in, put it there, and you erase the dots you don't want. The ones that look like Donald Duck, you just erase all the Donald Duck dots. And because you want to do Richard Nixon, you just fill in all the spots where there should be a Richard Nixon dot. That's all they're doing here. It's that simple, that obvious. What's the counter argument? All right. Strong lensing allows them to see distant galaxies as they were in the distant past, which also requires them to enlarge them. That is, they have to magnify the distant objects to be able to see the distant object. And the key to magnification, again, is the light is diverging. Okay. And the point is for you to create a focus, you need to bend the light at one side of the focus, one side of the divergence a lot more than you need to bend the light on the other. All right. Let's see. Dark matter in the universe. Strong lensing to see dark galaxies as they were in the distant past, which gives them a good idea of what conditions were like. So they think this gives them a good idea. So it's more nonsense, right? When we have this horrible idea, a very vague and foggy and de minimis picture. And they just keep hyping it like we have a good idea of early conditions in the universe. And we really don't have anything like that. What the conditions were like billions of years ago. Again, they can't tell from just looking at a light source how far away it is. And so it gets very complicated in terms of trying to tell whether it's a bright source far away or a weak source close by. Very hard to tell those two things apart. And they need all kinds of, they use all kinds of mechanisms to try to detect that. But all of those are based on assumptions about what happens in space as light travels through it. And they're just assumptions because we can't do those experiments. We can't shoot a photon 15 billion light years and see what happens to it. And often gives astronomers the idea that the galaxy's activity back in their youth. So again, the idea that all the galaxies had a youth, another kind of assumption. Um, we're not talking about antimatter. Okay, let's see. Quote you, all you need to do is read Wikipedia. So again, what? Lesage gravitation is debunked. Again, this isn't Lesage in the first place, and I've already read the page and I've recited it and pointed out how there is no debunking. So again, you are just preaching dogma. Okay, what's the evidence for it being debunked? Richard Feynman's raindrop analogy. Okay, so because particle gravity has one flaw in it. We're not talking about particle gravity, by the way. We're talking about gravitational lensing. And so you're changing the subject. But, as I've pointed out before, my theory really isn't dependent on there not being photons moved by gravity. My point is there's no logical reason to believe that can happen. It makes no sense to any unification theory. You'll never unify physics if you give photons special powers. And that's all they've done with quantum mechanics and relativity is give photons special powers. Same force, same speed, same inverse square law. Somehow photons are magic, though. They do all kinds of wacky things. Unlike magnetic fields or unlike any other kind of force carrier, no, the photons are magical. So again, what debunk is there? There's just the drag argument. I've already answered the drag argument in numerous videos. It doesn't exist as a real argument. And if they gave it any thought whatsoever, they could figure that out. And they gave it no thought. And so you're just preaching the dogma, preaching a fucking religion. All right. Is there any evidence of antimatter? Completely off the subject, but I would argue there's no anti-anything. There's no anti-particles. All of it is a pile of crap. And as Susskind sort of pointed out, the anti-particle is just the space where the particle left. So technically, when an electron leaves an atom, the atom is short an electron, which means it was a pressure field. And that pressure field feels the absence of the electron. And that's essentially the anti-particle is the deficit left where the electron left. It leaves a hole behind, so to speak. And that's the anti-particle. It's not really a particle. All right, where did he propose Lesage, though? Aren't you just pigeonholing? Well, to say that every particle theory is just Lesage is kind of silly. Lesage, 300 years ago, well, I mean, the font guy who was the original inventor of it, he did very well for 300 years ago, okay? And it fits, it creates the inverse square law. It doesn't just fit it, it explains why there is an inverse square law. It's a beautifully coherent explanation for gravity. So if you've looked at the particle model at all, mock gravity is a fascinatingly beautiful explanation. And it only has this one defect where you have to sort of explain why there isn't a drag, an ether drag. But you can if you think about it. And that's the point. They didn't really think about it. Stop thinking things up your ass. You'll end up butthurt. Well, whatever. Just obviously, like I said, this is just a religious fanatics, and they just won't concede a single argument. They won't concede. It's like the religious nuts. They won't concede. You point out how the evidence for God's existence is vacuous, non-existent, and they won't concede the point that it's a weak theory. They'll just say, no, you have to believe. You have to believe. Oh, shouldn't I be convinced by evidence? No, you don't need evidence. Just believe. All right. Did the universe have a beginning? It's just, you want me to block you? I will. I mean, this is totally off the subject. You don't see the title? It says gravitational lensing in the title. I'm reading a gravitational lensing article. What the fuck? Are you retarded? Apparently. Why assume physics needs to be unified? Well, because the forces have too much in common. That's why. As Henri Poincaré said, sort of a logical proof. If it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it flies like a duck and has a beak like a duck and has genetic code like a duck, it's a fucking duck. So yeah, you can't have completely different things that have too many things in common. And the fact that the forces have so much in common just screams they're really got to be related to the same thing. One can't be bent space and the other one quantum irregularity. Those two are really incompatible explanations for things. So I think your physics is going to remain, retarded until you recognize that you have to account for these things that move the same speed as being fundamentally or elementally caused by the same mechanism. One can't be bent space and the other be Heisenberg-Huygens space. All right. So I'm not assuming physics needs to be unified. I'm explaining why logically we already have enough evidence that there's a common function. I could make another logical argument that I think the fundamental universe gets simpler, not more complicated. So you could always go to the atom, so to speak. You could always reduce it to some fundamental players like protons and electrons. And you can understand how arranging protons and electrons in different ways can make 100 elements. But you're reducing it to a simpler mechanism. And yeah, so unification seems a rational pursuit. That's why Einstein pursued it, because it's rational. All right, you don't even question their fundamental assumptions. You just go along with what you cherry pick. I don't even understand this statement. You don't even question their fundamental assumptions. I don't understand what fundamental assumptions. The speed of light's not an assumption. It's been proven. The inverse square law isn't an assumption. It's proven. What stuff am I supposed to? What stuff? What you're an ether nut? Is that it? A Tesla ether nut? An electric universe kook? So you're just going to prove to me even more clearly that you're not for them. You're not defending conventional physics. You're just attacking any model that isn't the electric universe. You just go along with what they cherry pick. It seems that you do that because all the evidence for the electric universe is insanely cherry picked evidence. They never deal with the actual reliable experiments that have been done millions of times and demonstrate real function. And the stuff that we've actually witnessed, where asteroids actually do hit the Earth and they blow up a bunch of stuff and knock trees down, and no lightning bolts. All right. Why not 5 elements then? Why not 5 elements? Let's see. I'm just saying, a few people don't think unification is a where the hell did it go? Why not 5 elements then? To answer your question, is an exercise to reduce and simplify. I'm just saying that it's like the God thing. God is a silly explanation for a creation because the God is more complicated than the creation. So obviously, it's a real crappy explanation for why there's a complex universe. Say, well, there's an even more complex God that made it. Logically, I think it goes the other way around. A cruder system made the fancier system. The pieces on the chessboard, it's kind of rudimentary. The stuff the chessboard is made out of is even more rudimentary. It just goes, it gets simpler as you break it down, not more complicated. Is Lawrence Krauss also spreading physics propaganda? Well, I mean, obviously he is, in the sense that he claims that dark matter is a real thing. He defends quantum mechanics as, and actually will concede, it doesn't make any sense, but, blah, 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 the same bullshit. I've played videos where he's said his bullshit, and, I'm sure he can't accurately describe the two-slit experiment either, although I haven't seen him do it yet. Talking about forces, not atoms. Keep up. I don't know exactly what that's connected to, but it was already explained in detail how the lens can stretch the image, even accounting your argument. No, there was no evidence of magnification whatsoever. You've proven you've demonstrated nothing. You demonstrate that you can put colored dots on a piece of paper in front of a lens, and you'll still see the dots as blurry images. Those blurry images aren't relevant to galaxies that have a shape, okay, and have different colors in them. Look, there's pictures right in this article. There's different colors, different bits. There's a whole texture to it. No evidence that any of that could be retained by that wrong lens. So nothing's been demonstrated, you liar. I mean, your people are just so fucking disgusting. Nothing was already explained in detail. Where's the detailed explanation? No detailed explanation. They didn't magnify. So first off, it's useless in this conversation as an explanation for galactic lensing, which is always a magnification. Always. So first show me the lens magnifying something. Okay. Even accounting your argument, which was acknowledged. Nothing was acknowledged by me. So fuck you, liar. You admit you didn't understand it. No, I didn't admit any such thing. What I said was, I don't understand how they think this is an argument. I don't understand how this experiment has anything to do with galactic lensing. It's not an experiment demonstrating magnification. It's not an experiment demonstrating how much distortion there is from left to right. Nothing. Why wouldn't you do the rational thing and have a picture of Donald Duck and see what Donald Duck looks like through the lens? Why use an orange spot when you could have used an image? You fucking cunt. No, I'm just going to delete you, but you deserve worse, you liar. I'm not mocking your primitive defense of status quo with a backward model. Keep up. All right. First off, I don't think his defense is primitive. I think his defense is illogical. So call it what it is. You want to resort to silly analogies. Okay. So what's a silly analogy? So again, I mean, it'd be nice if you just quote what's a silly analogy. Okay. Apples, oranges, and peaches have a lot in common. Well, I'm just saying these apples, oranges, and peaches, everything about them they have in common. Yes, every elemental part is the same. And obviously, apples, oranges, and peaches have so much in common. They're not crabs. They're not trees. I mean, they're not pine trees. They're not, you can say lots of things about what they're not. And they have everything, they have very much in common. So compared to lions, apples, oranges, and peaches are almost identical. Doesn't mean they're the same fruit, but obviously they're on the same genetic branch. And that's the point being made, that all the forces are on the same universal evolution branch. Just because they're round and have seeds inside. Okay, so again, you want to take it to a silly extreme, go ahead. I'm just saying, you're saying it's not evidence. So you would say the Henry Poincaré guy, who usually the truther, the ether nuts like, because he was an ether nut, he was full of shit to make the rational argument that these competing theories can't be right if they have too many things in common as explanations, because they have too many things that are wrong. So they can't have a common ancestry and end up being fundamentally different. They have to be fundamentally related. That's the argument. But anyway. All right. And your own argument is against drag requires you to come up with a perpetual motion machine, your words. Yes. Well, don't you think that's exactly what happens when I throw a wrench in space? When I throw a wrench in space, isn't that essentially perpetual motion? The wrench will just keep going. You do realize that, right? I mean, if it doesn't hit anything, it could theoretically just go right out of the universe. That initial velocity is the only velocity it needs, and it will perpetually move across distance forever. I didn't invent it, perpetual motion. I'm explaining why it exists. You can't see the difference? You really can't understand I didn't invent perpetual motion to make my argument. Perpetual motion already exists in the universe, and I'm explaining why it exists. You really are an idiot. A fucking lying cunt piece of shit idiot. God damn. Oh, this is the other guy. Yeah, well, he's an idiot too. Drag necessarily dissipates energy. Why? I mean, that to what? Where does the energy dissipate to? So your argument is that the particles aren't kinetic when I said they are directly. So all they can do is really exchange direction. So you're saying it's a necessity that if the two particles hit each other and reflect, or the two particles go through each other, or the two particles miss each other, that you say there's physics somewhere that says you can tell which one happened because somehow there'll be a magical heat signature or something. No, if it's purely kinetic, there won't be any evidence of the encounter. No little bits break off, no extra vibrations, no anything. They just exchange direction. So this is the same as this missing. So drag isn't necessarily an obligation of interaction. It's only your assumption that it is. And it's just an assumption. Okay. Let's see. So whatever you come up with will violate the first law of thermodynamics. So again, another argument where, first off, no, it won't if it's kinetic. Second, my argument is that the force is actually captured in the object, that is in the mechanism of how an atom is structured. That's why atoms can be thrown to the moon, but an electron can't. Can't throw an electron to the moon, can't throw a proton to the moon. You have to throw something bigger. And there's a reason for that, a mechanical reason. And it has to do with how force is trapped between electrons and protons. And so they can create the perpetual motion engine. All right. My God, you have the attention span of a goldfish or whatever. Clearly, goldfish can. I don't know where you think goldfish don't have an attention span. They seem pretty attentive. When they're shitting, they're shitting. When they're eating, they're eating. They seem pretty attentive. Two consecutive comments are usually related to each other. Numbnuts. Fuck you. I don't know what you're whining about this time. And now you're lying about me supporting Electric Universe. Amazing. No, I'm just speculating about what's your motivation here. You're clearly saying their science that you don't like conventional physics theory too much. And you're saying you don't like my theory too much. Well, what theory do you like? God? Funny, draft science, how about you cite one experiment that the speed of light is constant off the top of your head? Well, they bounce the laser beam off the moon and get the bounce back and can measure tiny differences in the distance between the moon and the Earth based on the speed of the laser light. So that's a pretty compelling. I mean, the fact that we actually flew there, so we kind of know how far away it is, kind of, seals the deal, doesn't it? Can you do that? Yeah, I just did that. Do you know your shit well enough? Yeah, I guess I do. Oh, and the best experiment supporting the idea that gravity travels at the speed of light is LIGO. Well, that's just ridiculous. actually, preposterously ridiculous. As LIGO has no clue how far away any of the stuff is it was listening to, and no, it doesn't have any way to measure distance. Someone showed a picture where the lens shape type stretching the things. So again, this stretching this way doesn't mean anything. Those objects were so close to the lens. You don't understand that all they did was take an image with dots on it, put it a foot away from a lens, and then take a picture of the other side. You think that's gravitational lensing, then you're a silly person. So of course it distorted the image laterally this way because it's so close to the lens. Jesus Christ, God damn. No one's suggesting that's what's causing the distortion in gravitational lensing. The objects are billions of light years away. They're not really close to the lens. Oh, shit. You said the lens shape can create Einstein rings. Yeah, an Einstein ring technically is supposed to be tiny, tiny, thin line. It's not supposed to be a big fat line. It's not supposed to have any detail in it at all. It's supposed to be just a shred of light, a little tiny shred. So yes, a real ring, not one of these fake ones. And it was demonstratively wrong. So again, nothing was demonstrated to be wrong, just more lies. Again, and it's not, you can create any kind of distortion. The closer I put, say I have to have an out of focus lens to do this. These lenses all work because of the right shape. So your wrong shaped lens, if I put a piece of popcorn just an inch away, I'll certainly get a bizarre amount of distortion in the lens because that's what it does. It focuses on something close and expands an image. It doesn't do what a gravity lens is supposed to do, which is take something far away that's small and expand the image. So you're still not conceding the fundamental argument. The lens is fundamentally the wrong shape to be magnifying anything at a distance. You, being the dishonest narcissist, will never acknowledge that. Acknowledge what? So again, just another huge, giant, preposterous mischaracterization of what was said and what was demonstrated. So just keep lying some more. You pathetic liar. Oh, man. I challenge you to an online debate. Great. All you have to do, look, I'll give you the room. Give me your email address, and I'll send you the link to the room. You show up. Where we respond to each other in essay format, because this is BS. Well, fuck you in essay format. I'm not going to waste time writing you essays about how your fucking ass is gaping. Fuck that. Just provide evidence. I'm just saying, you're saying editing was a good experiment. Show me the evidence. You're saying the wrong shaped lens is okay. Show me the evidence. You can't find evidence demonstrating what you're saying is true? That the evidence for gravitational lensing is strong? The strong evidence of what? I mean, amazing. Yeah, the energy is conserved without drag. Yeah, the energy is conserved without drag. Well, the point is that's clearly what happens in reality, is you throw a wrench into space and there's no drag. So clearly there's some quality about a moving wrench, okay, where there's, without an atmosphere or any other matter to hit, the force itself doesn't drag on it. So there's nothing stopping it from continuing to move. Now, I would argue that there would be something stopping it from continuing to move if it didn't have a little motor in the boat. So the reason why it moves upstream is because it has a motor in it. And it just happens to be that motor keeps pushing it, because as long as it holds the force, as long as it holds little photons moving the speed of light in a direction, just like the space shuttle collecting an equal amount of force that's coming out of its tail end, it's going that way as a big giant flame, where there's a force going into the space shuttle that's just as energetic, just as powerful as that flame. That's just a fact. The equal but opposite reaction is a real force, and the real force went into the space shuttle. And until you take that force out, till you have an equal but opposite force to knock it out, to compensate for it. It's there. It's real. And the shuttle keeps going. I'm going to explain this, but whatever. Again, all this resistance and not one concession that the evidence for their theory, their model, is weak. That these are all subjects that should be open to discussion, and that there shouldn't be any notion that they've proven anything. Proven. Time to convict, throw the man in prison for life. That they have evidence strong enough for that kind of confidence. And they have nothing like that. This evidence isn't strong enough for a jaywalking citation. Okay. The meaning is what counts, whatever that means. You two are suggesting he proposes Lesage. I don't know what that. He proposes something similar. No, yeah, no. I similar in what sense? It's a particle model. Lesage had no details because they didn't have any facts back then. Do you think he didn't know what an electron was or a proton? He had no clue about how things work. So the best he could do was they were ultra mundane particles that clearly could be kind of absorbed, but not all of them would be absorbed. That is, they're so mundane that some of them would go right through the object and some wouldn't. All right. So it's a pretty good thought for somebody hundreds of years ago. All right. To do that without all the knowledge that we've gained since then about electricity and atoms and electrons and all that shit. And you're mocking it. No, that was a very good start. I took it a step further where I recognized that, no, you can explain charge and polarization and magnetism with the same force. So it's nothing like Lesage gravity in the sense that obviously mine's a much more detailed and much more relevant to electrons and protons and their function. Fuckhead. All right, only similar in that he suggests a sea of force that is then filtered by matter in specific fashion. Well, this isn't even that complex of filtering. The electromagnetic spectrum is obviously the force at a frequency. So the little bullets, when they have distance between them, you can identify them based on that distance. But if they come without a frequency, that is too far apart or too separated by distance, then they're not going to be recognized by a piece of matter. That's so that's gravity. Gravity is unrecognizable because it doesn't have a consistent frequency. And magnetism is just filtering it for the electron force versus the proton force. So it gives you a clear explanation for why magnets magnify the force, because they're segregating the left punch from the right punch. So instead of throwing both punches at once, doing this kind of thing, yin and yanging, no, you either yin or you yang. They're separate directions. Only similar, okay, specific fashion, but this video is about lensing and you're off topic. Well, they just keep staying off the topic, which is the evidence for lensing is very weak, which they won't concede. Yes, and that alone is enough to cause the same problems with rebound force, aberration, and drag. Well, I've already done, there's no such thing as a rebound force. Aberration is irrelevant once you understand the inverse square law. There's no such thing as aberration. And I've explained drag. So again, all things I have thoroughly gone over as subjects. So just more lying. All right, saying demonstratively wrong things, that the wrong lens shape is also subject to the same criticism. Well, how? Because it deflects less outward, and yet it still created a ring. So again, you just keep denying the fact that it won't create a ring of a distant object. It won't take a distant object and magnify it in the lens into a big ring. It won't make a small object bigger into a big ring. So you just keep denying the fundamental logic behind their use of the lens. You keep pretending that this experiment is exactly the same as gravitational lensing. They're just keep being a fucking 5-year-old. Even a 5-year-old, I could explain to a 5-year-old. I could say, look, we have a galaxy, and this whole idea of looking through things at distances, and we have this idea of a telescope to see things really, really far away, and then we have this idea of something that you could see like really up close. And the 5-year-old could understand that, yeah, with this lens, I can't do things far away. It doesn't work if I don't put it right up next to my eye. That I have to change the focal length to be able to do that. And that doing some dopey experiment like this isn't going to imitate seeing a fucking galaxy that's 5 billion light years away from the lens. But just keep being a douche. Go ahead. Fuck you, douche. All right. I'll be back, you weasel. Fuck you. That wrong shaped lens can create rings. So again, he keeps saying it and it can't. So again, I can only say no, it can't. So just keep lying. Consider a piece of matter that above a high frequency photon, whatever that means. There's no such thing as a whatever. Well, go ahead. And emits 2 photons, half the energy. There's no such thing as a half energy photon. So that's crap, shit, insane nonsense. It can have half the frequency. It can't have half the energy. So then you can imagine how energy is conserved by pushing the matter momentarily. I don't even understand how that's on the subject exactly, but whatever. I swear to God, you're a 17-year-old who never grew up, worse than Ayn Rand. Well, fuck you, then I'll just block you. I'm not Ayn Rand. I'm not talking a dogma. I'm giving you perfectly logical explanations you can't possibly communicate. And this name calling thing is just useless waste of time after all these fucking comments, jackass. So I'll finally just say fuck off because it's just bullshit. I mean, I didn't waste my time saying you seem like you're a child molesting Adolf Hitler. I didn't waste time doing that. Fuck you. It's just a waste of time. Dogma. That's all he has is dogma. He wouldn't answer a single question. Some while back, the media claimed that Einstein's theory was legitimized during the taking measurements during the ellipse of the sun when they measured gravitational lensing. I don't know why you're repeating something I already know. Apparently, of the background star's behavior. Any thoughts? I don't know. I already read the article. I already talked about Eddington's bullshit experiment. Are you retarded? Apparently you're retarded. Okay, so enough of these assholes. I just get back to what I'm doing. I mean, I can't force you people to be reasonable or logical, right? I mean, you can lead people to fucking facts, and you can point them to a reasonable collection of the facts into groups and themes and concepts. But I mean, I can't force you not to be religious kooks. I can't force you not to be deceptive weasels. If you clearly have some sort of devotion, that is, you believe in God and you can't accept physics in any form, and you're just wasting my time by arguing any physical rules or any physical logic to the universe, fine. I'm saying if we take all the evidence that there exists and we compile that evidence to draw conclusions about how the universe functions, I'm saying, yes, it's logical first to recognize that things that have the same exact speed probably had the same mother at minimum. There's a clear connection. You just don't ambiguously end up with the same exact 3 million meters per second fucking goddamn speed. That just isn't, in the range of coincidences. That doesn't seem very probable. Just as it doesn't seem very probable that OJ would, hack his finger to pieces on the very night his wife's head happens to fall off. All right, there are 2 main types of lensing. We already did that. Okay, galaxies. Okay. Another type of lensing called micro lensing is usually caused by stars passing in front of another one. So this is even funnier nonsense. The star in front of the star lensing, or against a more distant object. The shape of the object may be distorted as it is with stronger lensing, but the intensity of the light waves. wavers. Um, so that's just saying the sun is moving, and so the light wavers because the amount of light that gets through is wavered. But yeah, that doesn't have anything to do with lensing. That tells astronomers that the micro lensing is likely involved. It doesn't say, it doesn't tell them anything. It's such a pile of crap. Gravitational lensing occurs in all wavelengths of light. Well, you would imagine that lensing should take place in all forms of force, actually. So you would think that gravity gets lensed too. From radio and infrared to magnetism probably gets lensed. From radio to infrared to visible to ultraviolet, which makes sense since they're all part of the spectrum of electromagnetic radiation that bathes the universe. So again, this whole idea that there is such a thing as the spectrum of electromagnetic radiation, another, a whole pile of assumptive science, used to build another pile of assumptions. Um, you know. So here we have the most nothing of images. These are, I believe this is the quasar image. So these two dots are very similar. So the orange behind this is an actual thing. And then this blue dot here and this dot are supposed to be two very similar objects, so the same brightness. So one of them is on top of the other object, the lens, actually, which is the funny part of this. And these are really the same object being lensed. Now, it doesn't make any logical sense because one is clearly not anywhere near the focus here, so they couldn't be on the two sides evenly. So there's no way we could see it at this angle if it was an Einstein ring type event, in that you see two images because one image is on exactly the opposite side of the lens. They're not on opposite sides of anything. So a horrible image. Okay, this says this pair of bright objects in the center of the image were once thought to be twin quasars. They are actually two images of a very distant quasar being gravitationally lensed. So their first conclusion was they're two bright objects, quasars. That means very old galaxies. Now, the trick is with these galaxies is, see, they're blue shifted. You can see the blue shift, which is kind of funny. But the claim is that they're really hugely red shifted, and that the real energy coming from the quasars is a lot more ultraviolet. And the ultraviolet is being red shifted into visible blue. You see, I think that's what they're saying is happening, which is pretty bizarre. All right. Why do people keep bringing up the Hubble Space Telescope? Well, I mean, you're pretty stupid if you don't understand why they do, because these are Hubble telescope images, and they're all that. These are the lenses. These are the images associated with lensing, because we can't see Eddington's. No one shows Eddington's plates because you can't see anything on Eddington's plates. If I showed you the two plates, the control and the eclipse plate, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I mean, it's not a very fun thing because it doesn't show anything. This is visually interesting because there's a claim here. This is the same object viewed twice. Your proposal can be taken in a number of different ways, and I didn't know what exactly you're thinking. It would take too long to flesh out the idea. Well, it just sounds like a cop-out. However, why can't you then apply the idea to any force itself? Then you would end up with forces that can't push, or forces that depend only on velocity rather than acceleration. So I don't even know what that means. You don't get velocity without first accelerating. So, the two concepts are fundamentally related in that sense. You're accelerated into a velocity. You have to acquire it. Oh, and why doesn't he acknowledge the Hippocampus mission? Because I don't think it's that interesting. The satellite that looked at the entire sky and found consistent results with the deflection formula. Yeah, exactly. So it looked at a bunch of tiny movement in stars in the universe, aberration, and concluded it was lensing. Why again, why don't you show us the 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 detail and the explanation for exactly how this stuff is very compelling as evidence? Because I bet you can't do that. Of course, he'll pretend no other experiment other than the Eddington one exists. No, as I have pointed out, if you analyze any one of these experiments, like the radio wave ones, for example, you'll find huge defects in them, in the sense that the radio wave ones work where they send, say, 9 megavolts worth of energy, and they get back 2, okay, volts, or 2 amps back, and a tiny percentage. And so, of course, the tiny percentage could have come back just because of scatter, because of random scatter in just the right direction. It took the shorter path, so to speak, and you got the energy back faster than you would have without the bending. And nothing miraculous about that at all. Scatter as a perfectly rational explanation. But of course, they'll claim it was gravity that did it, when no, it's scatter could explain it because you got so little back. So just more bullshit. So again, you want to cite the experiment, I'll go ahead and do it. So you think this hippocampus mission is a really significant thing, huh? How much would you stake on it? I bet you I can rip it a new asshole. The raw data can be ripped a new asshole. So if visual spectrum gravitational lensing is well manifested and real, whatever that even means, I don't think it's well manifested in any way or real in any way. Has magnetic lensing been proven? Well, again, there's no evidence I've ever seen demonstrating a magnet ever bending any force whatsoever. It can only move matter. It can't move forces. I only wish to illustrate that a background field can be the source of energy. So that's Alexander saying this to the other jerk. By being receptive to it and expelling it in a way that is no longer usable. Yeah, well, all I have to do is say mock gravity. Look, mock gravity works. An external pressure causes the inverse square law and causes there to be an attraction between bodies that block the mock particles. If you put a bunch of BBs in a box and you shake them up, and then you put 2 checkers in there in any locations, the BBs will push the checkers into each other. The 2 checkers will appear as if they're attracted to each other and move towards each other. All right. It is the timing of the signal and the scatter that doesn't explain how still. It is the timing of the signal and scatter doesn't explain how it still occurs at about approximately 30 degrees away from the sun. 30 degrees away from the sun. Again, the only way you can do it is by mathematics that's a rig. So yeah, there's no chance. There's not enough gravity. There's not even enough gravity on the surface of the sun, frankly. Fair enough, but those things are difficult to think about these things in detail and truly exploring their consequences. So I don't even know where they got into conversations about how many degrees away from the sun you can have lensing at. I didn't even see that conversation. No, I don't know what these guys are talking about. But I also know I didn't get to do all this article, and it's getting late, and I was tired before I even started. All right, the first gravitational lens, other than the 1919, so here we go, other than the 1919 eclipse experiment, lensing experiment. So again, it's just, more argument that somehow that was great evidence, was discovered in 1979 when astronomers looked at something dubbed twin OSQSO. Originally, these astronomers thought the objects might be a pair of quasar twins. which, kind of just silly baby talk. Why would there be twins? They just mean that, oh yeah, there just happens to be two quasars that close together. Wow. Surprise, surprise. Isn't that cute? After careful observation using Kitt Peak National Observatory in Arizona. Now, careful in what way? I mean, okay, you got a little bit better picture, but how does that help you any? Astronomers were able to figure out that there weren't two identical quasars, distant, very active galaxies. So it's not a very active galaxy, it's a new galaxy, an early galaxy. High energy, yes, a hot galaxy. Near each other in space. Instead, they were actually, so now somehow they actually knew it. So because they got a little better image, this image presumably, or an image worse than this in 79, who knows how bad the image was. And somehow that image just said to them, oh no, that's lensing because, well, there's something glowing behind this one. So obviously that must be able to lens light. And yeah, okay, it's not the way it's supposed to be, where it's supposed to be right directly behind the center where these two objects are. You can't have it off center. That doesn't make any logical sense. No, who cares? Instead, they were actually two images of a more distant quasar that were produced as the quasar's light passed near a very massive gravity along the light's path of travel. So again, just some notion that yes, there was an object and it bent the light, took light diverging, okay, from one object to divergent images, two images cast on a lens, all right, and then those two images were individually focused, bent just the right amount, all the light bent just the right amount, and in a gravity circumstance, that is, the light that has to be on the outside, that has to be bent more, was bent less, and the light on the inside that has to be bent less was bent more. And somehow that all makes sense. I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense at all. That observation was made in optical light, visible light, and was later confirmed in radio observations using the Very Large Array in New Mexico. So again, radio just gives you a lower resolution image, confirms nothing. It just confirms that they say, yeah, why not? The confirmation didn't look anything different than this. The radio signal was just a less detailed image, just like this one. It doesn't say anything more. They're just pretending that, yeah, it was confirmed, our made up crap was confirmed by our made up crap. I mean, our wrong assumptions and some more wrong assumptions were required, so that's what we did. It's called, I don't know what that is. Draft science that he says is already enough to be the theory of everything, when this isn't even a draft, but rather just an agglomeration of ideas. I don't know how exactly it's perfectly. I perfectly illustrate how you can go from one force to the next force to the next force, and how they all work. How the nuclear forces work to make protons get very close to each other. How the electromagnetic spectrum, okay, is created as you move electrons closer to each other, creating higher pressure, which also creates voltage, which creates charge, and which also explains that once you have electrons in density, that creates the magnetic filter. So, I mean, it all connects. It's not just some sloppy connection of things. So again, just this, you just make these vacuous accusations of somehow it isn't, nuh-uh, you're not saying anything. You're not explaining how a single sentence I said is incorrect. Quote a sentence of mine and say that's not right, and here's the evidence of why it's not right, you faggot. I mean, pussy. Jesus. Let's see. That is like asking, how does rocket science get you to Moore's law? I don't know what he asked. He didn't ask anything, did he? Let's see what it says. how dense is the field? How do you get E equals 1 over 2 mv squared? Um, well, first off, the statement about what you're even going to measure energy in is kind of irrelevant. I would argue that there's nothing inconsistent if you just recognize that the photon is the thing carrying the energy, and that the number of photons that pass a given point depend on the frequency. So if I have high energy light moving across a given point as a consistent ray of light, say ultraviolet light, more little bits are going to be in that ray than in a infrared, because they're spaced further apart. So if I shoot 10 bullets and I shoot 1 per second, obviously if I shoot 2 per second, less bullets are going to pass a given point. So there's no inconsistency with any energy. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if it's, anyway, it's getting late anyway. Sorry, computer crash. So probably enough. Um, Appreciate the comments, mostly, but yeah, the tone is just useless. Again, I make the point how the evidence is weak. They don't want to argue their weak evidence. Um, my case, it wasn't what I was doing. I wasn't presenting my counter argument. The point was for them to defend the existing theory as doctrine, as something that's been well evidenced and well established as good reason to believe. That's what's the argument, is how bad their case is, and there's basically being presented as a motion to say the hell with it. They haven't proven their case, not even close. And yes, but I'm very confident I have a better theory and a complete theory. But why should I even have to present it when we can't have you make the reasonable concession that yes, the evidence of guilt is very poor, and I can make a case for innocence. But first, I want them to defend their dogmatic, uh, uh, fascist confidence, claiming they know and they're sure and they're confident when they don't have any evidence to back up those statements or that behavior. They can't defend their arrogance. So anyway, till next time, such.